Okay, so I know what you're thinking. Why should I overexpose or underexpose? Shouldn't I just expose my photos correctly every time? Although we want our images to always be correctly exposed, underexposing or overexposing an image and then exposing it back in post-production can heavily affect the outcome of a photo. And so in this video, I'll show you the effects of overexposing and underexposing and how you can use it to your advantage. Why should I underexpose? There are many situations in which underexposing a photo actually makes sense. Generally, when you underexpose a photo, you get the benefits of better dynamic range. Dynamic range is how much your camera can keep details in the highlights and shadow area of your photos. So if your camera has really bad dynamic range, what it means is that the highlights will be completely white, whilst the shadow will be completely black. Now if your camera has really good dynamic range, that'll mean that the highlights will have lots of details, whilst the shadow will be very visible. Now what people don't know is that you can actually extend your camera's dynamic range by just underexposing your photos. The reason why is because it's easier for a camera to retrieve shadow details than highlights. So when you underexpose a photo, essentially what you're doing is exposing for the highlights and then you up the shadows to make it look exposed normally again. This trick is essentially useful with daytime photos or photos where there's a bright sunny sky. Now when you underexpose an image, you get the advantage of better dynamic range, but with the drawback of noise in your shadows. But because you're probably going to be shooting at a really low ISO during daytime, this shouldn't affect your photos too much. Why should I overexpose? So you know how underexposing gives you dynamic range with the drawback of noise performance? Well, if you overexpose, you actually get the opposite. So you lose some dynamic range, but you get the advantage of better noise performance. So where would I want better noise performance? During a high ISO photo or low light photography. Low light photography is usually really tricky because the camera doesn't have enough light to get a clean image. So to get a photo that is exposed correctly, you need to crank up that ISO really high, which will make for a really noisy image. Now what people don't know is that if you overexpose a low light photo and then you underexpose it back in post-production, you actually get a much cleaner image. This trick still works even if you're using really high ISO values. But by doing so, you actually end up losing a lot of dynamic range. But because you're shooting in low light, dynamic range really isn't something that you're searching for, as there is no highlights in the sky to retrieve. So, conclusion. There are many situations in which underexposing or overexposing can be very beneficial to you. If you underexpose an image, you get better dynamic range, whilst if you overexpose an image, you get better noise performance. That makes underexposing really good for daytime shooting, while overexposing really good during low light photography. Now keep in mind that after shooting all those photos, you still need to expose them back in normal in post-production, which is why I would suggest you to shoot in RAW if you are ever to do this. But the real takeaway of this video is that your camera is better than you think.